This week in Idaho, our D.C. Representative, Senator Mike Crapo, blocks a measure to strangle Trump's tariff powers. And then here a little bit more locally, our law enforcement continues to enforce border security efforts here in the state. And the Idaho House approves $1 million in property tax relief via a bill. And then lastly, Boise churches alter scripture for an LGBTQ plus film. That and so much more. This is the local Yokel Idaho Midweek Report, where we give you a quick overview of the news in Idaho for the last week. Glad to have you here with us today. I'm sorry if my voice sounds a little bit off. I had a bit of a cold this last week, and thankfully I got over it just in time to do recording here, so I should be clear. Granted, maybe a little bit of congestion there, but I'm feeling much better, so thank you for anybody out there that knew that and was praying for me. That said, we do have a very full midweek report this week. Oftentimes, I know sometimes you guys are busy, you can't get through the whole thing, but we did save some really special stories towards the end of it. One about Idaho's culture. There's a group that's trying to safeguard those, and also some other stuff about property taxes when it comes to hospitals and things, which I know is a little bit of a heated thing. We try to put the main or most interesting stories in the first part of the midweek report, but that it doesn't always work out that way because there's only so many slots to fill. That said, though, going to our headline story here, Senator Mike Crapo, a Republican here from Idaho, blocked a bill on February 27th, which would have required congressional approval before imposing tariffs on U.S. allies and free trade partners. Not quite sure what that definition is of free trade partners, but oh well. The bill, introduced by Senator Chris Coons, a Democrat from Delaware, and Tim Kaine, a Democrat from Virginia, no shocker there, aimed to prevent President Trump from unilaterally imposing tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Looking at Crapo's reason for this, who is the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, if you didn't know, objected to the bill, calling it, quote, too blunt an instrument when nuance is called for. He argued while tariff action should not be taken lightly, completely removing the option would be detrimental. Crapo emphasized the need for flexibility in trade policy, noting that free trade agreements often include exemptions for national security grounds. Moving forward, the block bill came just days before President Trump's planned implementation of a 25% tariff on products from Canada and Mexico. For those of you in the finance world, you're probably tracking that very heavily. With Coons, the Democrat opposing this, or one of them, warning that it could cost the average American household about $1,200 annually. Despite the setback, Coons expressed hopes with Crapo on improving market access and U.S. trade engagement with partners, which is simply to say that he's not willing to come to the negotiating table at all and all that gobbledygook. And with tariffs out of the way and going to the other thing that Trump is very adamant on, border security, Idaho's local law enforcement agencies are stepping up to support Trump's immigration policies, reinforcing Idaho's commitment to border security and public safety. Governor Brad Little's recent executive order aligns Idaho with the federal directives, empowering state and local police to cooperate fully with ICE and DHS. Moving forward, this move allows Idaho officers to inquire about immigration status during lawful detentions, lawful being the key one there, not unlawful ones, and share information with federal authorities. As for the reaction on how this has been with lawmakers, conservative ones have praised the initiative, citing the need to combat illegal immigration and protect American and Idaho's sovereignty. Supporters argue, including them, that the approach will remove dangerous criminals from Idaho's street more effectively, especially if they've broken one of the most basic laws in our country, which is to be here legally. Leveraging federal resources to deport offenders quickly, the 287G program, which you may not have heard of, allows local law enforcement to assist in federal immigration law enforcement, which with this, we're expecting it to play quite a crucial role in this effort. In conclusion, as Idaho takes a stand against illegal immigration and enforcing immigration law, it sets an example for other states, wink wink, Oregon and Washington, to follow in upholding the rule of law and Trump's executive order. And speaking of another thing that Trump is loving to do, which is cut taxes, but coming a little bit more locally here to Idaho, in a unanimous vote, the Idaho House approved House Bill 304, which you may be asking what that is, allocates an additional $50 million for property tax relief. The bill, which now heads to the Senate, builds on the 2023 House Bill 292 by adding funds to the Homeowners Relief Fund. If you didn't know about that, maybe go check that out, and maintaining $50 million for school funding to pay down bonds and levies that may be happening as the state's trying to help with that. As for the reaction on that, Representative Jason Monks, the bill's sponsor, emphasized the importance of providing $100 million in property tax relief to Idahoans. Now, like most things in politics, there's usually a bit of a debate. Some lawmakers have expressed hesitation, as we alluded to earlier, citing potential economic challenges. Representative Stephanie Mickelson mentioning concerns about tariffs and stock market volatility, while Representative John Gannon highlighted the legislature's consideration of bills affecting nearly $500 million in revenue. However, Representative Monks argued that taxpayers should benefit from state funds, stating, quote, "Who would we rather have holding the money, our citizens or the state government?" And stepping out of finances, but not politics, as we step a little bit into the culture war here in the Treasure Valley, two Boise churches, Boise First Congregational UCC and Boise Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, that is a bit of a mouthful, hosted a screening of 1946, The Mistranslation That Shifted Culture, on March 11th, 2025. The film claims a 1946 Bible translation was misused. The Bible does have terms in it that clearly state that homosexuality is a sin and wrong. They're arguing that those are incorrectly translated into the Bible and has led to some bad conclusions. Specifically, Reverend Josh Lee, a gay pastor, organized the event after debating legislatures over same-sex marriage. He argues that the mistranslation twisted scripture, justifying opposition to LGBTQ, don't forget the plus, rights. Both of these churches, defying conservative Christian norms and most of church history, are trying to manipulate biblical context to support homosexual relations, arguing that there is a mistranslation. Granted, most of church history, even if you accept the Catholic part of it, does teach not a good thing. In conclusion, though, Lee insists it's about justice and compassion, not sin, urging an altered interpretation of Scripture's tenets. Church leaders understand it as a distortion of biblical truth, is what he's putting forward, bending God's word to fit more modern ideals rather than the other way around. Hey there, if you're enjoying the Midweek Report, which if you've reached this point, you probably are, do us a favor and hit the like and subscribe/follow button, depending on the platform, on YouTube, Rumble, or Twitter. It helps us stay connected with you and helps us reach more folks who love Idaho just like you. And speaking of another thing that we all love so dearly, which is the medical system here in Idaho, St. Luke's Health System continues to provide emergency abortion care despite Idaho's near-total abortion ban, citing federal law as justification. The hospital argues that the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, or MTALA, I feel like there's a better way to say it, I've said it a couple times now, which mandates stabilizing treatments for patients in emergencies, taking precedent over state restrictions. Federal Judge B. Lynn Windmill has temporarily upheld the stance, granting a restraining order to shield doctors from prosecution. As for Idaho's reaction on this, Idaho Attorney General Ral Labrador insists that the law protects both mothers and unborn children, dismissing claims that abortions are never necessary for stabilizing care. However, St. Luke's points to cases where delays in treatment force patients to be airlifted out of state, which we would also argue there that's a little bit of a stretch. It's just they were scared of running afoul of the law, in, quote, endangering the health and also hitting St. Luke's profits. That might be a little bit more of the source, but in conclusion, as federal laws mandating abortion are being removed under the Trump administration, little tease for our next story, St. Luke's legal battle underscores a growing clash between the law of the land and the personal ideologies that the medical industry has nationally and possibly here in Idaho. And speaking about that story I just teased in our conclusion there, the Trump administration has decided to drop the emergency abortion lawsuit against Idaho, marking a significant shift in federal policy. Looking at this case, if you don't quite remember it, it was originally filed by the Biden administration, challenging Idaho's abortion ban for allegedly violating the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, or that big long acronym again, EMTALA, I think I got it all. The main proponent of this lawsuit, St. Luke's Medical System, being one of Idaho's largest healthcare providers, has sought a temporary restraining order to continue providing emergency abortions, which they've gotten now, as you just heard. The hospital system's public stance is that they fear it may lose profit without federal protection. Granted, we would argue it's probably more suspected it's not about profit, but more about the ideology that doctors and the head leading staff of the medical industry have, but don't have more evidence just than observation. Coming back to the dropping of this case, the move aligns with Trump's administration's stance on leaving abortion regulation to individual states. As the situation unfolds, healthcare providers and lawmakers await the court's decision on Wednesday, which could significantly close one of the loopholes for abortion access here in Idaho. And continuing with the topic of abortion, this second section is pretty much going to be about just abortion. In a growing trend across conservative states, like Idaho, lawmakers are introducing bills that would allow women who seek abortions to face homicide charges. Specifically here in Idaho State, Senator Brandon Shippey, as you may all remember, introduced such a legislation, arguing that, quote, justice requires accountability for intentional actions, arguing that the action that creates a baby is intentional there. But going more nationally, similar bills are pending in Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, South Carolina, and Texas, classifying embryos, or fetuses, as unborn children, who can be victims of homicide then, because, they're actually individuals. Critics argue these laws could have far-reaching consequences. I think that's the point of it, potentially affecting tax deductions and census calculations. Granted, I don't think that's the main reason they're worried about that, but that's another thing. Also, there have been some recent misleading polls claiming to show that abortion restrictions negatively impact pregnancy care and family planning. Probably the family planning part. This survey, commissioned by pro-abortion organizations, fails to acknowledge the numerous crisis pregnancy centers and faith-based organizations providing compassionate care for unexpected mothers. The survey focused on job relocation and economic factors, ignoring more of the moral imperative to defend innocent lives, which is usually what the pro-life argument more is about. In conclusion, as Christians, and I would argue if you're being morally consistent, we should advocate for policies that support adoption, being a way better way to have that, more human beings on Earth if we believe the population is going down, strengthen families, which we would argue is the nuclear center of our society and needs to be reinforced badly right now, and provide resources for mothers in need, rather than just giving them a cop-out, which may be more like abortion. And staying with the topic of abortion, it's our last one here and coming very much more local. The Idaho Senate State Affairs Committee voted 5-4 against advancing Senate Bill 1077, effectively halting legislation that would have subsidized crisis pregnancy centers in the state. The bill, sponsored by Senator Ben Adams, a Republican from Nampa, aimed to provide over $1 million in taxpayer funds to qualified centers, with a minimum grant of about $25,000 per center. The proposed legislation faced opposition from some unexpected quarters, including anti-abortion advocates. John Crowder, a former board chairman of the Religious Crisis Pregnancy Center, argued that these centers do not lack funding and that taxpayer dollars should not be subsidizing nonprofits in either side of the abortion debate. Despite support from some crisis pregnancy center leaders, concerns were raised about the bill's constitutionality and its potential to discourage individual donations. The committee's decision, with the context of past legislation, does reflect that Idaho's legislature is pro-life, but it doesn't want the strings of government funds, which we are acutely aware of, getting involved in crisis pregnancy centers, which help many unexpected mothers. Hey, did you not know about any of these things we talked about? Were they new for you or something that you think friends and family should know about? Please don't hesitate to share it. You can share this episode or our shorts that come out about a week or two later, and it helps you spread the news about our state and also helps Idahoans be informed and engaged about what's happening in the state we all love. And speaking of another topic that is hot here in Idaho, education, last Monday, March 3rd, the House Education Committee introduced a bill that would prohibit K-12 public schools from teaching about sexual orientation or gender identity in any grade. Representative Dale Hawkins, a Republican from Ferndale, presented the expanded version of the bill, citing strong parental concerns as the reason for extending the prohibition to all grades. The proposed legislation would require school districts to adopt policies prohibiting classroom instruction on these topics across all subjects, including any incidental mentions in subjects like math or history. Granted, I don't know why you would bring it up in math. Most things in response, the bill's topic has raised questions about its potential impact on discussing historical events or biological concepts related to sexuality. Things sometimes we would argue are for parents. While local school districts currently determine sex education curricula in Idaho, left up to the local areas, with parents having the option, however, to opt their children out, this bill would create a blanket ban on LGBTQ plus topics. Gotta have all the letters in there. The Idaho School Boards Association has expressed concern about the potential unintended consequences, noting that no known district currently teaches these subjects explicitly. I have no doubt the viewer out there can probably find some. I just don't have them ready at the moment. The committee's introduction of the bill paves the way for a full public hearing, which, if you want this to move forward or not, probably the way you want to go, with only one dissenting vote from Representative Monica Church, a Democrat from Boise. A once respected French restaurant in Eagle, Idaho, has sadly succumbed to the pressures of progressive ideology by hosting a drag brunch. Not quite sure how that boosts business. The owners, Michelle and Frank Paquette, claim that the event was, quote, epic and good, clean fun, end quote. But concerned citizens see it differently. Specifically, the Paquette's decision to welcome drag performers into their establishment marks a little bit of a disturbing shift in Eagle's values. Michelle Paquette's statement is that, quote, Eagle has turned into something different than it was 25 years ago, is a bit of a stark reminder of a bit of the moral decay that's creeping in nationally and here in Idaho. Despite reassurances that the event was PG and not sexual in nature, the very presence of men dressed as women, we would argue, kind of mocks God's intended design and blurs the lines between genders, which is something that our society here in Idaho and most of the Western world has held for a long time. The restaurant's embrace of this lifestyle choice does send a bit of a dangerous message to our youth and undermines the traditional values that have long been the backbone of our society here in Idaho and in the West. The normalization of drag performers in public spaces is, we would argue, a bit of a deliberate attempt to undermine biblical truths, one of the things that our culture is built on, and sadly corrupt our children in the process. We would argue, though, however, that we should, pray for the Paquettes and others who have been led astray by the false promise of diversity at the expense of what God's word tells us is the true nature of human beings. And a little bit of a hard transition here, but you may see the connection here, going a little bit into enforcing laws. Idaho stands on the brink of becoming the only state in the nation, first for us, we don't usually often do that, to adopting firing squad as the primary method of execution. This comes after some frustrations about the process. The bill that would do this has passed both chambers of the state legislature, House and Senate, with strong support, and now awaits Governor Brad Little's signature. If signed into law, House Bill 37 would make Idaho the first state to designate the firing squad as the main execution method, surpassing 5 other states that allow it as only an alternative, not the primary. Supporters argue that this method is more humane and effective, potentially avoiding the challenges associated with lethal injection drugs and lengthy legal appeals, because there have been so many botched lethal injections. The bill's sponsor, including Representative Bruce Skog and Senator Doug Ricks, envisioned a mechanized approach to firing squad executions, with the Idaho Department of Corrections considering a remotely operated weapon system alongside traditional methods. However, critics, including Senator Dan Foreman, a veteran and former police officer, argue that the process is far from humane. If approved, the new law would take effect July 1st, 2026, potentially impacting 9 individuals currently on Idaho's death row. As the state is adjusting with the contentious issue, the eyes of the state do turn to Governor Little, whose decision will shape the future of capital punishment here in Idaho. And speaking of punishment and someone that may have to face this law if it passes, an Idaho judge has admonished attorneys in the Brian Kohberger murder case for extensive secrecy, warning that their frequent use of sealed filings undermines the public's First Amendment's rights. Judge Stephen Hippler declared that confidentiality should be an exception, not the rule, and ordered that both sides adopt less restrictive measures, such as redacting sensitive details or using initials instead of full names. If you haven't been keeping up with the story, Kohberger faces 4 counts of murder for the November 2022, man, it's been 3 years already, goodness, stabbing deaths of the University of Idaho students. As the trial approaches, numerous civil motions have been filed, including one citing autism spectrum disorder to challenge the death penalty, another addressing the use of the term like psychopath during the proceedings. Hippler ruled that some documents should be redacted and released, while others should remain sealed. In conclusion, the trial is set to begin on August 11th and is expected to last over 3 months. Hey there, if you want to have all of our updates, which we will definitely be covering the case when it hits off on August 11th, please consider subscribing here on YouTube or our Substack. And specifically on our Substack, we would recommend it, because then you can have our Idaho bill breakdowns that make some of the bills we're talking about a lot easier to understand and track with, and we're able to go into more in depth than we can here on the Midweek Report. And coming to the last section here, which if you stayed with us from our tease from above, thank you so very much. And this story is something that is very interesting to me and many. The Idaho Preservation Society has officially launched with a mission to build an aligned community by preserving and promoting Idaho's unique culture. Founded by Idahoans, the organization aims to protect the state's core values amidst rapid population growth, something that many of us locals fear deep down. Now, the first question I had when I was looking at this announcement is, what exactly are they defining as Idaho's culture? Do we agree with that? They say it's characterized by helpfulness, authenticity, resourcefulness, an adventurous spirit, and grit. They argue these values are shaped by the state's rural landscape and self-reliant ethos, and are what the society seeks to preserve. Their goal, stated by the executive director Nathan Fox, emphasizes the importance of understanding and living these core values. The Society's goal is to achieve an 80% membership rate across Idaho by 2023, ensuring that the continued preservation of the state's distinct way of life. The organization invites all Idahoans, both longtime residents and newcomers, to join their efforts in protecting and promoting Idaho's culture. By embodying these values daily, the members can hopefully strengthen their community and preserve the essence of what makes Idaho so unique and why so many people are moving here and enjoy it so very much. And speaking of one last bill, I know I always say it, they sneak in everywhere. Idaho lawmakers have introduced a revised Medicaid cost control bill, not repeal, which is House Bill 345. It proposes sweeping reforms without threatening to repeal Medicaid expansion. The bill, which calls for work requirements for able-bodied Medicaid recipients and allows eligible Idahoans to access tax credits for purchasing insurance on state health care exchange. The new legislation exempts college and vocational school students from work requirements and plans to shift Medicaid benefit management to private companies. It also aims to end Idaho's unique doctor-managed care model, which basically is just trying to take Medicaid and add a little bit more restrictions that it's just not for everyone that's under a certain dollar amount, rather than just repealing it outright. The impact, if passed, could save Idaho about $15.9 million in the fiscal year 2026, with the potential for greater future savings. However, many of the bill's proposals require federal approval and could take years to implement, so it may get bogged down if passed. Moving forward, the bill's introduction does face some controversy over transparency concerns, but was ultimately formally introduced, making it available for public review and hopefully a public comment and hearing if it doesn't get drored in committee. And speaking of one more bill, I swear I should probably read ahead a little bit more. House Bill 315, currently making its way through the Idaho legislature, aims to revise the state's information technology equipment sales tax exemption for data centers. That is a mouthful. The bill would cap the sales tax exemption period to 7 years for companies applying after March 1st, 2025, instead of allowing a permanent exemption. The legislation has garnered support from those concerned about development pressures in rural areas and the resource demands of data centers, arguing that if they build there, they can have an incentive kind of off the bat, but over time they should pay back to the community ultimately in taxes. Looking at the debate on this, proponents argue that the bill provides an initial incentive for companies while ensuring a clear endpoint for tax breaks. However, some industry representatives have expressed concerns about changing the rules, liken it to yanking the football away from businesses. The bill includes provisions for grandfathering existing exemptions, kind of arguing that we're not yanking the football away, particularly with Meta's CUNA facility, which currently is the only data center large enough to qualify for this exemption. If passed, any sales tax collected from the 7 years exemption period will be transferred to Idaho's tax relief fund, potentially benefiting state residents not just near where these data centers are built. And coming to our last story here, and this one clearly aimed at transparency, Idaho's open meeting law faces a new challenge as House Bill 172 advances through the legislature. The bill, initiated in Boise this year, aims to amend the law regarding multiple agenda items. It passed the House with 67 in favor, 0 against, and 3 absent, and is expected to clear the Senate. For those not following this story closely, the legislation stems from a contentious vote in the Hayden City Council in 2024 concerning the handling of the consent agenda. Councilwoman Sandra White discovered that the council had been violating its own Ordinance 214, which allowed any member to remove items from the consent calendar. In response, Mayor Alan Davis and 2 councilmen sought to challenge the law, requiring a majority vote to remove the items. In response, Mayor Alan Davis and 2 councilmen sought to challenge the law, requiring a majority vote to remove the items. This move, like most things, has sparked some debate and renewed focus on about transparency and rights in local government, specifically in city councils. The proposed bill, sponsored by Senator Ben Taze and Representative Elena Price, has garnered support, actually, from the Association of Idaho Cities. However, Hayden officials testified against it, inadvertently highlighting the need for clear state standards. In conclusion, as House Bill 172 progresses, it promises to bring more consistency to city council procedures across Idaho, potentially resolving conflicts like those seen in Hayden and other city council meetings across the state. And speaking of conflicts, you've got them, I've got them, and I need to move on to solve some of mine, but I hope we solved a little bit of yours and you enjoyed the report. I sincerely hope you found it valuable and enjoyable. If you liked the midweek report, make sure to check out our other content, specifically our bill breakdowns. Also, if we missed any important points or provided incorrect information, please feel free to reach out to us via email or on Twitter by tweeting me at LocalYokelIdaho. With the small team we have, we're not able to cover everything, but we do our best to cover the most interesting and important stories. Thank you for your continued support and assistance. That's all for now. I wish you a fantastic rest of your week. Godspeed.